This isn't just another rumor drifting through the noise. This is the kind of development that flips the entire story upside down. Because now we're not talking about whispers, not speculation, not social media threads spiraling out of control. We're talking about something far more dangerous, far more concrete. Emails, actual emails. Digital footprints, invitations that were never meant to be seen, never meant to be traced, and definitely never meant to resurface in the hands of someone like Tom Bower.
Having been a quote yacht girl, there have been more revelations.
He was shown the file, the thick file they had on Rachel Meghan Markle. The palace knew. The royal
Meghan Markle is moving forward on the lawsuit against Prince William and him taking her title.
And suddenly, everything that once sounded like distant gossip starts tightening into something uncomfortably real. Because emails don't just disappear into thin air, they sit somewhere, buried, archived, waiting, and if what's being claimed is even partially true, then what Bower has allegedly uncovered isn't just a loose narrative, it's a trail, a pattern, a system of access that connects moments people once dismissed as coincidence into something that feels structured, deliberate, and very, very difficult to ignore. Because think about it. Photos can be explained away, appearances can be reframed, timelines can be blurred, but emails come with timestamps, recipients, senders, language, intent. They tell a story without needing interpretation, and that's exactly what has people leaning in right now, because the suggestion isn't just that invitations existed, it's that they were documented, circulated, possibly saved in places no one expected anyone to look.
You think the Sussex Overdrive is unbelievable. But I mean, I don't think that he is going to get...
And here's where it starts to get unsettling, because this isn't being framed as a random discovery. The way it's being whispered about, the way insiders are hinting at it, it sounds methodical, like pieces that were always there, just waiting for someone patient enough to connect them. And Bower, whether you agree with him or not, has built an entire reputation on exactly that kind of patience. So when talk begins circulating that emails linked to yacht invitations have been found or tracked or even verified, the conversation shifts instantly. It stops being about whether something happened and starts becoming about how much of it can be proven. And that's a completely different kind of pressure, because once documentation enters the picture, silence starts to feel louder, responses start to feel calculated, and every past denial suddenly gets re-examined under a harsher light.
And Meghan Markle. He's now considering all options, including...
What's even more intense is how this changes the timeline people thought they understood. Because if invitations were being sent, received, acknowledged, then those moments weren't random, they were planned, coordinated, structured. And suddenly, every image, every appearance, every connection starts to feel like part of something bigger. Something that wasn't just happening in the moment, but was being arranged behind the scenes in ways no one fully saw at the time. And that's where the internet has gone absolutely wild. Because once the idea of emails entered the conversation, people didn't just stop at the headline, they started digging. Screenshots, archived posts, old mentions, forgotten blogs, event listings, everything is being pulled apart and reassembled like a puzzle. Because now there's a possibility that all those scattered pieces might actually connect.
Accused of carefully crafting her public image. But recent revelations have ignited fierce debates about who she really is behind the scenes.
And the deeper people look, the more intense the speculation becomes, because emails imply communication, and communication implies relationships, and relationships imply access, and access is the one thing that changes how every past interaction is perceived. It's no longer just about being present in certain spaces, it's about how those spaces were entered in the first place. And then comes the most uncomfortable part of all of this, the idea that these emails, if they exist in the way they're being described, might not just sit quietly in the background, because documents have a way of resurfacing. They get shared, leaked, referenced, cross-checked. They don't stay hidden forever, especially not when someone is actively looking for them. And that's exactly what's fueling the tension right now, because this doesn't feel like a one-time reveal. It feels like the beginning of something unfolding, like the first piece of a larger collection that hasn't fully surfaced yet. And that's why the reaction behind the scenes is reportedly shifting, because this isn't something that can be brushed off easily. Because here's the reality. Stories can be denied, narratives can be challenged, but documents force a different different kind of response. They demand explanation. They demand context. And sometimes they demand silence, because saying the wrong thing only adds fuel to something that's already gaining momentum. And right now, that momentum is building. Because if emails linked to yacht invitations really are part of what Bauer is working with, or even investigating, then this isn't just about revisiting the past. This is about redefining it, reframing it in a way that makes everything that came after look different. And people are starting to feel that shift. They're watching old interviews again, but this time with a different question in mind. They're looking at timelines not as isolated events, but as sequences that might connect in ways they hadn't considered before. They're paying attention to details that once seemed insignificant, because now those details might fit into something larger. And the most striking part of all of this is how quickly perception can change once a new element is introduced. Because before this, it was all about claims, interpretations, narratives. But now, the conversation includes the possibility of evidence, and that changes everything. Because evidence doesn't argue. It sits there, and people decide what it means. And right now, the world is watching, waiting, questioning, because if this development goes even a step further, if even a single piece of what's being hinted at actually surfaces publicly, then this entire story doesn't just continue. It escalates. And once it escalates, there's no going back to how it was before. Because the moment emails enter the narrative, the story stops being just a story. It becomes something else entirely. And what makes this entire situation feel even more explosive is not just the idea that emails might exist, but what those emails would actually mean if they were ever fully exposed. Because an email invitation isn't just a casual message, it's a record, a receipt of access, proof that someone was expected, someone was welcomed, someone was on a list. And once you introduce the concept of lists, invitations, and private events, the story stops being vague and starts becoming structured in a way that makes people very uncomfortable. Because now the conversation shifts from did this happen to who else was there? And that is the question that reportedly has people the most nervous, because a guest list never contains just one name, and if invitations were sent by email, then that means there were organizers, coordinators, recipients, replies, confirmations, an entire chain of communication that maps out who was in those circles and how those circles connected to each other. And this is where the situation starts to feel bigger than just one person, because if there were emails, then there were multiple inboxes, multiple people involved, multiple points where those records could have been saved, forwarded, archived, or even forgotten in old accounts that no one thought would ever matter again. But the thing about digital history is that it doesn't disappear just because people move on. It sits there, sometimes for years, untouched, until someone decides to go looking for it. And according to what's being whispered around media circles, the most unsettling part for the people watching this unfold is that Tom Bauer is known for exactly that kind of digging. He doesn't just look at headlines, he looks at timelines, communications, connections between people, and the spaces where those connections overlap. So when the claim starts circulating that emails linked to yacht invitations have allegedly been found or traced, it doesn't sound like a random discovery. It sounds like the result of someone mapping out a network and then following the lines until they reach something concrete. And suddenly, the silence from certain corners starts to feel louder than any denial ever could. Because when something is completely false, the reaction is usually fast, loud, aggressive. But when something is complicated, when something involves multiple people, multiple timelines, and multiple possible interpretations, the response often becomes slower, more careful, more controlled, because every word matters and every statement can be cross-checked against whatever documents might exist. And that's why this situation feels like it's sitting on a pressure point, because if emails are involved, then this isn't just about memory anymore. People can argue about what they remember. They can disagree about conversations, they can reinterpret events, but emails don't rely on memory. They rely on records, dates, names, subject lines, attachments, language that was written in a specific moment in time before anyone knew that moment might be examined years later. And if there's one thing that makes people in powerful circles nervous, it's the idea of old communications being pulled back into the light and looked at with new questions in mind. Because think about what an invitation email actually says without saying it directly. It says you were invited. It says someone wanted you there. It says you were part of a group selected to be in a specific place at a specific time with specific people. And when those places are described as private yachts, exclusive gatherings, closed guest lists, the implications become far more serious than just attending a party. It becomes about access, about networks, about who knew who and how those introductions were made. And that's the part of this story that keeps growing instead of fading, because every time a new detail gets added, granted, even a small one, it doesn't close the story. It opens more questions. If there were emails, who sent them? If there were guest lists, who organized them? If there were invitations, who introduced the guests to the organizers? And how did those introductions happen in the first place? You see how this starts to expand? It stops being one headline and starts becoming an entire web of connections that people want to understand, map, and in some cases, distance themselves from. And the most dramatic shift in all of this is how the public narrative changes when the word allegedly is placed next to something that sounds technical, documented, and specific. Because allegations about behavior can be argued endlessly, but allegations about documents create a completely different kind of tension, because documents can eventually appear. They can be leaked, they can be quoted, they can be described in detail. And once that happens, the conversation moves from speculation to interpretation of evidence. And that is the moment every public figure fears. Not the rumor stage, not the gossip stage, but the document stage. The stage where people stop asking, is this true? And start asking how much of this is true. And right now, the reason this story refuses to die down is because it feels like it's hovering right on the edge of that stage. Not fully there yet, but close enough that people are paying very close attention to every new hint, every new claim, every new suggestion that more information might be coming. Because if there's one thing Tom Bauer is known for, it's that he doesn't usually move unless he believes there's something solid enough to stand on. He takes his time, he builds slowly, and then he releases information in pieces, not all at once, which means every new development feels like a continuation rather than a one-time scandal that disappears after a week. So now the story isn't just about yacht invitations anymore. It's about emails. It's about records. It's about who was connected to who. It's about who knew what and when. And most importantly, it's about whether this is the end of the story or just the beginning of a much bigger one that hasn't fully come out yet. Because if more emails exist, if more names are connected, if more timelines are matched, then what we're watching right now might not be the peak of the story. It might be the buildup. And the reason people can't stop watching stories like this is because they don't end suddenly. They unfold piece by piece, detail by detail, until one day a small detail turns into a big turning point and everyone realizes the story they thought they understood was actually something very different all along. And that is exactly why this update, these alleged emails, these alleged invitations, this alleged paper trail has people watching closer than ever before. Because if there really is a trail, then trails lead somewhere. And everyone is now waiting to see where this one leads.